welcome everybody to the 15th edition already of Schools Out. And we have a very, very special guest tonight, someone who we're very excited and proud to have lured to our virtual salon here in Rotterdam. And tonight we have Pascale Sablan from New York City talking to us. Pascale is an architect, an AIA registered architect. She was trained as an architect at Columbia University and before that at the Pratt Institute. She has been an historian of NOMA, and NOMA is the National Organization of Minority Architects, and she has done amazing work there. Then she has also started her own foundation or organization called Beyond the Built Environment, of which she is the CEO. And right now she has added to this pile of responsibilities. Also, she has become the New York Associate of David Adjaye Architects and Associates. Very recently, Pascale has received the AIA Whitney M. Young Jr. Award, which is always awarded to architects whose work and who themselves embody social responsibility. It's a very, very congratulations again, Pascale, for this wonderful award. It's a very prestigious and a very interesting award. So I give to you Pascale Sablan. Pascale will talk to us, and then Michelle Provost and I will ask her some questions, and we hope that you will enjoy your evening. Welcome, Pascale.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to engage our community here. And so the warm welcome is very much appreciated. I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. And so I just wanna make sure you guys can confirm that you can see it. Okay, and then full screen. All right, are we good?
Are we good?
Yes.
We're good.
Okay.
All right, awesome, wonderful. Again, my name is Pascale Sablan. I am the founder and executive director of Beyond the Built Environment, an associate at Adjaye Associates in the New York office. I'm also the AIA New York Board of Directors and the AIA National Strategic Planning Committee member, which allows me to help write the strategic plan, which the organization and all of its members have to follow for 5 years. I am also the NOMA historian, as well as the NOMA president-elect. I am the 5th woman ever to hold that position in the organization's 50-year legacy. And the reason why I hold all these hats, aside from architect and mom and spouse, is these specific positions allow me to engage greater society for many reasons. One, to help me become way more informed and understand what are the challenges that we are facing as a profession. Also to identify who are the key critical members that are helping push for progress and who are those that are opposing it at the same time. But then the best part, aside from building this coalition and community of those who have similar values and are pushing for things and progress as well, is that it actually directly engages me with society, with communities, and really have a series of programs and initiatives that allow us to really engage and offer us as a profession to not just the wealthy, but those who are impacted by the built environment, which is everybody, right? And so one of my favorite programs is the Project Pipeline Camp, where we actually take a series of elementary school kids, talk to them about architecture, give them a tour about their community, and show them how they can leverage their brilliance and their knowledge to change their built environment. And when I'm waving at these kids as they skip home with their parents after presenting their projects and excited about architecture, I often wonder what happens when they continue to research the idea of architecture and architects. So for me, I would Google it. So let's try Googling it. So if we Google the word great architects, Google banner comes up with 50 names and faces. On your screen right now is the first 40, which you can see ranges from contemporary, currently practicing architects all the way to Michelangelo and Raphael. So this is a large breadth of time that is being captured in this search. Now, how many do you think are women? 1. And how many do you think are African American or Black? 0. But we have 9 minorities. Zaha is very important. She helps hold us down in these 2 categories, because really what it's saying to these students, especially these small kids of color, is that they don't have the capacity to be great. And this was very much problematic for me. And that kind of goes into my push for how we're erasing our histories and how we need to elevate it to the greater society. So I went to Google's headquarters in New York and said, hey, why is this happening when I type in these words? And they said, Pascal, frankly, there's not enough content that call you all great. And so really it was a lot for me to understand that there's not enough content and not enough documentation that actually captures our contributions to society. So was that real, that there's not, any Black architects who've done significant work? Absolutely not. This is a great print screen moment, if you can, of 40 incredible Black architects who've changed and built and designed our world, and people that we should become familiar and know and should have the word great in front of their names. Paired with that, I listened to a lecture called In Afrocentric Education as a Human Rights Speech by Dr. Adelaide Sanford. And she talked about and introduced me to Albert Shanker. Albert Shanker in the US was basically the president of Federation of Teachers between 1964 and 1997. In his capacity, he pretty much handled our public school systems for the country. Now, people love him and herald him as an important figure because he was really focused on equity in terms of the quality of education. That irregardless of where you were in the country, that your education was standardized and helped in that capacity. Also tried to level out teachers and teacher unions and kind of create that component. But part of his theory or method of creating equity was about erasing culture. And so one of his thoughts were, never let the African-American child learn of his or her history, because if they do, they relate more to their ethnicity and will not become an American. And so her points, and what I tend to agree with, is that our education system, both within architecture and outside of architecture, really does not do a good job of documenting that history, keeping that history, and embedding our culture and our identities in the work that we've done and how we herald them. So the way I've set up this presentation tonight is to communicate in a few ways. And one of them is visually. The Black and white pages, like such, are really setting up the issue. The yellow pages speak to what I personally have been trying to do to solve this issue, address this issue. And then the cyan pages, my favorite color, is what I'm aspiring to do in the future. And the importance of that is to say, you don't have to wait until you've accomplished something to start sharing it with your community, right? You never know who part of these calls, part of these Zooms, in these audiences that can actually help move the mission forward and align with your values and what you think are important. So one of the first things I did is started to curate these exhibitions called Say It Loud. The first one was in January of 2017, which is Say It Loud New York, where I elevated the identities and work of 22 diverse architects and designers of New York. The concept was to see our faces, hear our voices, and feel our impact within the colorful tapestry of our heritage. The exhibition was meant and purposeful to be bright and vibrant and loud, if you will. To see our faces, I made sure that the thumbnails and the labels for the projects had our headshots as well. Hear our voices, we had video playing on either side of the gallery that spoke to our experiences in the profession, and then feel our impact, and that's through our work, really, which is how we want you to see and understand and appreciate us as well. From there, our exhibition was invited to the United Nations, which was important. And what was powerful is they didn't let me be as bright and or vibrant. They definitely had restrictions there, but they let me be loud and really provide an opportunity for me to speak to world leaders specifically about representation and how it matters and elevating our greatness. And so during the opening ceremony, they gave me the opportunity to speak, which I leveraged to not just talk about and thank the exhibition for happening, but what we really wanted to see long-term for the exhibition as a mission. And I asked to help me make this exhibition a national movement. And so thinking about that, they actually said, before I got to my seat, Pascal, we'll make this an international movement. So March 25th, 2019 was Say It Loud Day, where the United Nations centers worldwide had the exhibition translated into 8 different languages. So that's how you're seeing Say It Loud in all those languages in the center of your screen, and invited professors and students to come and see the work of these important designers. Now, this was a powerful moment because I'd never really envisioned or had trajectory that this exhibition that I had in New York was going to have such a global reach. But what it taught me is that this could not be a traveling exhibition where I'm elevating the same 22 people, glorious and amazing 22 people, but it can't be the same ones. And really started to think about making it a traveling activation instead. It is also a self-submitting process where people actually fill out a form, submit their stories, their narratives, put the images in and submit for us. And so part of that process then allows those designers to be the authors and introduce themselves to the world in their lens, in the way they see fit, which is also powerful and gives them the flexibility or the experience of putting themselves out there, saying that they're worthy of elevation and praise, which is something that is not very common to us culturally. I also did a series of Say It Loud activations, such as Say It Loud Pennsylvania. And here I wanted to share this exhibition because part of the critiques that I had from my past exhibitions, whether it be at the Center for Architecture at United Nations, was that I was having them in very highbrow, hard to access spaces. And if the concept was to invite the greater community, I needed to be more accessible to society. So with Say It Loud Pennsylvania, we really hosted the exhibition at a community gallery where we really programmed it with keynote speakers, panel discussions, youth days. Really every other day was really amplifying their voice. And then what I really want to talk to you about is like the schools of architecture. In our education process, it was actually is very difficult to get schools of architecture to agree to have an exhibition that focuses on women and people of color. I'm not sure why, but it is. So shout outs to Georgia Tech for being my first yes and allowing me to elevate really brilliant and powerful designers of Georgia. I also had the Say It Loud United Kingdom, which was our first kind of international exhibition, which was interesting because this community is not very familiar with me, right? In the US, people kind of know what I'm up to. They've heard about me saying it loud here and there. But the UK was a different kind of introduction. So I really had to partner with community organizations and advocacy groups that helped pull the concept and pull the request forward and really gather as much brilliance as possible. So really partnered with RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects, the Black Females in Architecture Group, as well as the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust Foundation. And then also, we also had a Say It Loud Ohio exhibition in March of 2020. It took us 6 months to do. We had 44 featured designers, 32 video testimonials, and 2 hours before the exhibition opened, the governor got on the screen and said, COVID is crazy, no more gatherings of large groups. So, everything has to shut down. So really only the first 90 people who came to the exhibition actually got to see it. And then after that, it was gone. So what I did was actually converted the exhibition to a virtual platform. So now we have a virtual gallery where you have all the headshots and thumbnails of everybody who's featured in the exhibition. And when you click on it, you actually get a full profile page on one of the designers, their name, their firm name, what they're about, their bio, what inspires them, what introduced them to architecture, as well as their video testimonials. So this became a really important pivot moment for me in 2020 to see how I could continue to move the mission forward virtually and not necessarily depending on the physical spaces all the time. And so what am I aspiring to do, you ask? Well, I'm trying to, again, introduce architecture and the profession to small kids and get them excited. So part of that is working with a diverse artist to create caricatures of our designers and 3D pop-ups of their work with the words "I can too," so that those kids can practice self-affirmation. And so really creating that. So that's my Learn Out Loud children's book. And then also trying to work with Legos architecture series, which is great, but I wanted more projects, or I want projects designed by women and people of color featured in their catalog of tools and toys as well. So again, really pushing our contributions and making sure that it's known. The namesake of this lecture is I was asked to stand, and that's because when I was in school, a professor asked me to stand, me and another classmate, and said we would never become architects because we're Black and because we were women, which was shocking to me that my professor would make such a strong proclamation without knowing my name or capacity, that in a classroom of 60 students, everybody was quiet, and that there was only 2 of us that actually fit that criteria. So it was really powerful of a moment, and actually my advocacy aha moment, which actually helped me understand that I would be representing always, not just being Pascal, but being a person of color and being a woman. And so really feeling the burden of always needing to go above and beyond in everything that I do when I represent us. And when I share this story, I want to make sure that I showcase that I typically ask the audience to stand if they've ever been told similarly that they couldn't because of their gender and race. And so it doesn't just happen to me. It happens to people in schools of architecture, and it happens in a professional setting. And that is another layer of oppression that is embedded in our profession that we need to address as we start to try to push for more equity and diversity and inclusion into our world. Another important resource is the Directory of African American Architects, which was sponsored by the University of Cincinnati up until January last year. And at that point, they said, you know what, this website no longer serves us, so we're not going to no longer pay for it, which was disappointing because this was basically the platform in which we keep track of the percentages of women, BIPOC or African American architects in the profession. And so all this diversity pushes and initiatives, this is how we're keeping the profession accountable to see if we're making any progress. So I'm very proud of Noma National for stepping forward and taking over the directory. And now is the place where you're able to submit your name and be able to know. And that's how we in the US is tracking our progress in terms of diversity in our built environment and in our profession. Currently, there are 115,000 architects in the United States. 2% are African American, and there's 502 African American women architects in all of the US. I am the 315th, and that directory is how I know my number, living African American woman architect in the US. And I'm the 21st African American woman at FAIA, and the second in all of New York, which is insane to understand how small the numbers are, but really start to enforce why kind of that mission of raising our visibility is so important to me. I also create resources to see us as much as possible online. So as a Noma historian, I curate a Vimeo page that has videos, lectures, panel discussions, testimonials, project pipeline camps that speaks to our experiences and our values. I promise you we could talk about way more things rather than diversity and inclusion. And this is a great platform to see those lectures. We have about 95 lectures up there currently and 33,000 views. And the Smithsonian in Washington, DC actually hyperlinks to that page and says how it's an important resource. So fully excited for you all to kind of get familiar with this platform and leverage it as a resource for you as well. I also hosted a Young Designers Conference at Pratt, full circle, to kind of say this is a space that told me that I was not good enough. And when I was the president of the New York chapter, was able to engage and create this conference for 58 students, 25 speakers, both college and high school students, to really engage them in the profession and give them that encouragement that they can. And then also beyond getting school kids excited, crafting the interview events where we're helping with HR managers, recruiters, people who are in charge of hiring, and to hear what it is that they're looking for in the applications, and then performing mock interviews and portfolio reviews to, again, provide the tidbits and the information our team needs to then be able to not just graduate, but gain really good employment that allows them to kind of flourish in the profession. I also leveraged social media for social change and launched a Beyond the Built IG page, where every week a different diverse designer takes it over and talks about their experience. We currently have 6,000 followers and have featured 113 diverse designers. Again, it's another way of kind of flexing that experience of telling your story, also by diversifying the stories and the journeys that it takes to impact the built environment. And it's also building a community of those who care about hearing about our stories and learning from them as well. So if you're not following, I highly recommend that you follow that page as well. And then, I don't know if I mentioned, but I have done 18 Say It Loud exhibitions so far, with another 9 planned for this year and next. And so with all that content, with all that amazingness that we talked about, I launched the Great Diverse Designers Library. Google said there's not enough content that calls us great. No problem. So here's my library who does just that. And this library is free, no paywall. And we currently have 425 people featured. So anyone who's ever been featured in a Say It Loud exhibition is now found there. And it's sequenced by alphabetical order and by location. So you see our faces, you see our work, and you hear our voices virtually. And then within that same lens, during quarantine time, I converted all of my past physical exhibitions into virtual galleries. So you not only see pictures of the exhibition, but those people featured as well. And so these are the various galleries that we've done so far. So I highly recommend that you take a look and explore it as well. And so in the way that I usually engage is that I wait for a community group to invite me to come in and say it loud. Because I mean, I'm not the expert of all the greatness in your community, right? So I need somebody to help create that conduit. And we have the infrastructure, but really this is a collaborative process. What was clear is that there was a distinct section of the country and of the world that was not inviting me to say it loud, right? And so 2019, that's the representation of all those people who were featured in the library. And 2020 and 2021 is where we are now, right? So I really pushed last year to get as much people to submit, not just from the US, but globally, because architecture happens beyond the US, and I don't know why we're so centric in that regard. And so really having the ability to showcase the work of women and BIPOC designers of all over the world is really important and critical. And that this website and that library is used by clients, it's used by students, it's used by developers, it's used by publications, and really trying to elevate our story as much as possible. And the goal here really is to publish a book that captures the best of the library so that we can use that again for purposes of academia and learning and fight that force of erasure. Our ancestors are our heroes and we are their legacy. And so thinking about how architecture specifically has a legacy that is negative with communities of color, especially those who are socioeconomically challenged. And so it's not a matter of introducing the profession to kids of color. It's saying that we are the villains in this story, in this narrative, right? We deal with the debris, the scaffolding, the noises, the rodents, the smells. And when the architecture is revealed, it's rarely for that local community. It's usually a force of erasure of culture from that built environment, and an indication of gentrification, and that local people won't be able to afford to live there anymore. So honestly, architects are having a hard time luring young kids of color because we're not the good guys. And it's not a misconception, it's an accurate depiction of the relationship that we've established with those communities. And so as an architect, I also push for community engagement and for reflecting and embedding culture into the built environment, irregardless of the socioeconomic challenges. Then I also try to protect our history, right? There's a mad dash in February for US for Black History Month. And then also in March, because that's Women's Month, that they're pushing as much content out there as possible, and sometimes really in a way that's not accurate. And so I always find the time to mark up and let them know that they're not displaying our history accurately and make sure that they correct it. But not just for the purpose of yelling, but really establishing another relationship to ensure more justice moving forward. Then when I think about textbooks and just the understanding of how slavery is being taught in the United States, you know, there are states that don't even mention slavery in their academic requirements, that talk about slaves as immigrants, like we just came here. And my favorite is say that we're brought here to help do chores, right? And don't really speak to the vicious nature of what slavery was for this country and how it's manifested into racism, into the built environment and every kind of infrastructure in this country. And then they also have this photo of what slavery is, which is Black people in their Sunday best having a picnic on a wagon, which again, if the textbooks and our education is filtering out and flawed, then it's our architectural responsibility and role to embed that history into our spatial experiences. And then you have the erasure of the individuals. Now this one I'm going to talk to really quickly, but in Architects Magazine, they had a panel discussion with 5 panel speakers. Here you can see me moving the mouse. And Justin Garrett Moore was sitting center stage. And after this wonderful 1-hour talk, guess who got edited out of all of the video footage? No mention of him. His voice was completely cut out. The only thing you got to see was his shadow silhouette when they zoomed in into one of the other speakers. Now, when this happened in 2018, he brought it to their attention and crickets. Nobody could say nothing. But 2020, we observed the lynching of George Floyd and things started to come up. And so they put out this ridiculous article about the accidental erasure of Justin Garrett Moore. Now, anybody on this call who so much photoshopped a hair out of place in a picture knows how incredibly difficult it is to do so, than to say that you're gonna video footage a whole hour's worth of content and this person had a lapse of judgment. No, that was a directive. Let's be clear. Same magazine later did another panel discussion with 4 women and a Black man. Really important. And when the magazine went to print, who fell off the table and out of existence? The Black man, Stephen Gray. Again, So it's not just a matter of us elevating our identities, but it's also at the same time fighting this force of erasure that is clearly attacking us when we are the voice and the experts in these conversations and we're being pushed out of it relentlessly. So part of that is being as visible to our community as possible, participating in protests, holding our organizations and our institutions accountable for being and fighting for justice, and being really more relevant for the fight for civil rights. I also make room for our experiences and have lectures that cater to our voices and our stories and our narratives, which can also be scary for some people that we're having such controlled, bespoke discussions about particular communities, but we are the ones that have never been highlighted or have been rarely highlighted. So it's been important for me to carve out those spaces. And so part of my aspirations here is to create a really strong relationship with media. So I launched Say It With Media, which is another initiative as part of my Dismantling Injustice. With this, I'm asking print, digital, and broadcasting to commit to reporting the percentages of diverse designers that is featured in their publication annually, and to increase it by 5% until a minimum of 15% is reached. I'm also asking them to call us great, right? Google said nobody calls us great. I need y'all to do that. And you wouldn't be creating an article or publishing our project if you didn't think we were great, right? So really leveraging that availability. Also, a lot of my work is capturing contemporary, currently practicing designers. And so leveraging these publications resources to pull historical content on how we've been doing incredible work and not just brand new to the game. And then lastly, leveraging their platform to help educate about how architecture is used to facilitate oppression. So last section of the talk, I'm going as fast as I can without going too fast, is architecture that advocates, right? So how can architecture itself be the component that starts to dismantle the injustices? But before I do that, I need to talk to you about how architecture oppresses, right? So one of my favorite examples is Robert Moses. In New York specifically, I was taught that this person was the most amazing landscape designer and planner that ever ruled the world. He gave us Central Park. He did a lot of our green public spaces and waterfront, not realizing that when he did Central Park, he decimated an African American community in his master planning, and that he was an avid racist. And not just towards African Americans or Black people, but the undesirables, right? So that's immigrants, that's many people that fall within that capacity. So one clear example is Jones Beach. To get to Jones Beach, you actually have to drive on the Southern State Parkway. Robert Moses mandated that all overpass bridges, all 20 of them, had to be 9 feet or shorter, because he understood that the undesirables used buses as our main means of transportation. And so he wanted to make sure that the buses would not be able to go through these overpasses. Therefore, this is an example of how architecture specifically, the built environment specifically, was used and leveraged to facilitate racism and oppression. And then you have developments that are poor doors and rich doors, those who have market rate apartments versus affordable apartments. To me, is the equivalent of whites and colored only entrances and facilities and units. And really to push the fact that we need to understand that those developments couldn't have even happened had they not had the grant money and whatever supporting money of the affordable housing component. So to have two separate entrances is ridiculous. We also have gentrification. We also have redlining. There's many components of how architecture is used to facilitate those oppressions. And so here are some projects that I affectionately call the Lynching Museum, which is called the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which is an example of architecture that speaks to that dark history. I'm going to call it dark history, and I'm going to use the word history in quotes also, because as you can see in 2020, lynching and murdering people of color is something that is still heavily practiced. But if we want to go to the finite definition of an actual hanging, in 2017, an 8-year-old boy was hung by some high school students who thought it was funny in front of his 11-year-old sister. And what was really disturbing to me is, what was great is that their skills were not the best. So the kid was able to fall and was surviving, but there's still pictures of the rope run around his neck. And what was frustrating was law enforcement saying that they would not be pressing charges on those high school kids because they're air quote good kids. So again, there's a lack of accountability when our bodies are being the ones that are being stripped of life. But then there's also that erasure that's happening in our books that's not even advocating for what's happening. And so having pieces of architecture that speaks to that is really powerful and important as well, and a responsibility for us. The National Museum of African American History and Culture is another piece of architecture that also advocates for justice. First, it was traced back to 1915 when they first requested this museum on the mall, and they were told that African Americans had not contributed significantly to society to warrant a museum. So this project itself is a 100-year advocacy effort. Then it was designed by diverse designers, right? It was led by 3 Black male architects, Phil Freelon, David Adjaye, and J. Max Bond Jr., and a very diverse team. The building, the institution itself is the place, is the testimonial of our contributions to society. And it's also the archives. It's where we can move and send our artifacts and components of value that speaks to our history in a place where it could be safe. Because frankly, before this moment, where could we send them, right? And then embedding our heroes into the built environment. So really proud to be part of the team that got West 162nd Street renamed J. Max Bond Jr. Way, and really embedding him into our built environment as well. And then leveraging my position as the AIA New York Board of Directors. I actually in September was able to have a series of conversations, but we made it happen. This statement that asks our members to step away from designing cruel and unjust and harmful spaces of incarceration. That includes jails, prisons, detention centers, police stations, courthouses. Yes, I said it. As the US, we have plenty of those spaces, more than we need. And so now it's time that we lean into creating new typologies and new systems that are alternatives to imprisonments and restorative justice. So again, some of these hats that I'm wearing doesn't necessarily translate to the built environment, but policies and procedures that pushes us as a profession as well. And then the African Burial Ground National Monument, which is my very first project as an intern, which captures a site that they found while they're excavating for another federal building, and found bones and remains, and they were being thrown away. That was the story. And then whistle was blew, and then Howard University came, excavated, found 419 remains on the site. And we created and was part of the team for this African Burial Ground National Monument. My favorite part of this monument, I mean, it's all pretty amazing, but my favorite part about it is that there's a map here that captures the extent of the burial ground and the estimated 15,000 remains that are there, and showcases that all those buildings neighbors to us across the street and City Hall was literally figuratively built on the backs and bones of our ancestors. So using this piece of architecture to claim that history and create that moment there for us to understand and learn. And then environmental justice is also something that I'm very passionate about, is creating sustainability in the way we leverage our projects. Embedding culture into the built environment with the Bronx Point project is a 542 affordable housing unit project in the Bronx, and the first ever brick and mortar hip hop museum. There has never been a museum built about hip hop before, so I'm very proud to be part of this. And the actual concept for the project is hip hop, which is why we use very dark shades of brick and have fenestrations that dance and really capture that culture within that. So it's a project for the community with the community engagement that reflects that culture of that local community as well. And then the Cleveland Foundation headquarters, which is in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a project that the leaders always ask the question, how can this project serve the community? 50% of the program is outward facing, meaning it's for the community use. And we had extensive community meetings to really hear and engage what they want and what they needed from the project. It's important that when we engage communities and ask them to be part of our design process, that we handle their feedback with care and with respect, and that it is really addressed in everything and how we do things. Sorry, my computer is moving slow. My aspirations for that is to replace projects and monuments of oppressive people with those of our great leaders. And so here are some of those kind of instances where we're starting to identify those moments and create kind of monuments to our culture, which is an example here of Louisiana, where they did one for their Mardi Gras, where they took the podium where Robert Lee once stood and now have their culture and the community being heralded as the highest point and peak. Ultimately, the measure of a man is not where he stands in the moment of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at the time of challenge and controversy. My favorite MLK quote, many moons ago, I was asked to stand, and hopefully through this moment, through these conversations, through these discussions, you're inspired to stand with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal.
Thank you. Can I?
Yeah,
First,
please.
yeah. So thanks for this talk. It's amazing. It's not just a project. It's like a campaign or a crusade, and with activities on so many levels. That is really filling me with, I would say, respect and admiration. And it's also very relevant. Also in other places, like, well, this is of course why we invited you. Also in the Netherlands, this striving for inclusivity is very imminent. It's here, but we haven't succeeded yet in getting enough attention for that. So there's a lot of lessons in that. I think in certain areas, you could even say that the Netherlands are even doing worse than the US. Like the amount of women architects is just a little bit more than 20% here, even though more than half of the population in universities for architecture is consisting of women. And I think in the US, that's even a little bit more. So this attention for the representation of women and Black architects and minority architects is very necessary. I am also inspired by your export of it's not only a national campaign, it's an international campaign. So I could imagine that Say It Loud could also be something that we would do here. We can talk about that a little bit more. But you showed on your world map that you were sort of conquering the world. And since diversity and inclusivity means something else in every place of the world, I was wondering how you deal with that, with the meaning of diversity and inclusivity, when, for instance, you have an exhibition of Say It Loud in Nigeria or Kenya or India. So how does that work?
Right. So thank you so much. And I agree. I think there are different challenges of oppression that happens to women than people of color, but the end result is still the same, right? We're still being pulled out of or pushed out of the profession and in the built environment. And it's really to the detriment of our profession and the built environment. And so although we are 50-50 in terms of women in schools of architecture, when we graduate and get jobs, that number drastically drops. And the only number that's more abysmal of African-Americans in partner and principal levels is women with children, right? And so there's like this whole infrastructure of how our identities and things that should not really be part of the things that hold us back are being such a big role in our being able to progress in the profession. And so to that point, and it kind of goes back to that simple Google search about what a great architect is, right? I didn't say in the US, I didn't like just the words great architects. The fact that those who come up are 49 white males is important to understand. And so when I'm doing these Say It Loud exhibitions globally, and again, waiting for invitations from local communities, is understanding that our visibility and our education about what a great architect is still not balanced, is still not diverse. So even if I'm having a Say It Loud in Nigeria, I'm asking for women and people of color of Nigeria to be elevated. Now you might say, oh, then that's everybody. No, because in a lot of those communities, it's actually foreign countries and people who are coming in and engaging and empowering and developing their built environment. I remember when I tried to do a Say It Loud Bahamas, I thought that was going to be the easiest exhibition ever. And they're like, we don't get the contracts. Those contracts are really all foreign. And so it's very hard for us to have projects of significance in our own island for people to know us. So a lot of their work was really single family houses, but the larger developments was being outsourced to other countries. So part of this is really elevating the identities and contributions of local people so that when you're looking for those talents, when you're looking for that development project, you're not going to get the same story. Oh, we can't find any. We're here, right? Like it's not that, right? And oh, they don't have the capacity. Not true. Here's a library that's showcasing and proving the capacity. And so that's the reasoning behind all of that. And I really wanted it to be global because again, it almost feels, specifically in the US, either you're in the East Coast or the West Coast, and then there's no architecture that happens in between or on the other side of it also. So really just expanding the impact of women and people of color BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, is really important to the mission and to the work that I've been doing. Thank you so much for your question. That was a great one.
Thanks. One of the things that you talked about fascinates me very much. It's the fact that people of color or minorities, and I think that goes for the United States as well as for Western European cities, that often minorities have had an entirely different experience of what architecture, urban planning, urban renewal means, so that they might have a completely different and negative association with what architecture means. Now, does that all, the fact that you are trying to draw so many more people from minorities into the profession, these people who have lived an entirely different architectural history than the one that is being canonically taught at the schools, does that not mean that the profession will change? Because
absolutely, that's the goal.
A little bit about that. What are the implications for the profession itself?
Right. So
it's coloring.
Right. No, I appreciate it, because there's two parts to this, right? There's two parts. That one part is saying we need more diversity in the profession, right? And I'm making the equation to be justice, equity equals diversity and inclusion, right? If we want diversity and inclusion in the profession, then we actually need to have justice and equity in it first, right? And if you don't have the justice and equity, then the diversity and inclusion will not be sustainable. Meaning, I can make a room, fill it with 100 Black architects, great. But if we don't have the same access to the same profession, positions of power or pay, we're not gonna stay, right? So part of it is trying to diversify the profession, but then also understanding just because you're a Black person doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be working on Black communities, right? I don't want to make that equation, that assumption that we will come in and only be working on communities that reflect us. But to your point, we are bringing a series of ethoses and values and experiences from our built environment to the way we design.
Yeah.
We also now have a more inclusive awareness of more communities that need our work, that need our experience and help. And part of the Whitney M. Young Jr. Mission, right? His statement to us at 1968 AIA conference is that, wow, you architects are great at patting yourselves on the back and giving yourselves awards, but are completely irrelevant for the fight for civil rights and justice, right? And so that's the second part of this, is that architecture needs to be community engaging, and it needs to be reflective of the local communities. So that it's not necessarily the person who's paying you, it's not just the client, but it's also all those who are impacted by your architecture that should be part of the equation of how you design and manifest your thoughts into the built environment. And then lastly, to think about, architects don't need to just engage when there's an RFP or an RFQ or where there's an architecture component. We have all these skill sets. We are critical thinkers, problem solvers, synthesizers. We know how to analyze information pretty well. We can graphically create things together. We can offer all of that skill set and talent now to any community, to any mission, and not necessarily waiting for a museum or a monument to be commissioned to be part of that conversation. So what I'm pushing for is, on one hand, for us to be more diverse, to make more room for us, our experience in the built environment, and get us in a position to impact our built environment, but also architects as a profession to recognize our work, our role in the imprisonments, in the oppressions, in the racist, sexist infrastructures that is very real, and be part of the process of dismantling it as well. And that comes hand in hand. And between both those things, yes, I absolutely want to turn our profession upside down and make it more inclusive and less as a resource and an amenity for the wealthy, but actually a true resource for the community and society at large.
And just to follow up on that, you also talked about a pledge, right? A pledge not
the MOU?
Not to let's say, prop up a race
of detention,
a justice system by even refusing to build courthouses and police stations, right?
Yes.
So what I find interesting of that is that, of course, in the architecture world, there is a debate going on about we should really not be building or designing football stadiums in Qatar, because look at the amount of people dying there in building them. But with you really go, you strike home, or you put the knife in your own flesh, right?
That's right. That's right. Because I'm saying, for instance, let's talk about this for a second. You know, between we used to have 300,000 beds, and now we're at 900,000 beds in a short span of, I want to say 20 to 30 years, right? And some of these private prisons have a mandatory 80% to 100% occupancy rate, which means every time a new piece of architecture is constructed, we are the force that is pulling Black bodies out of their communities and into these institutions and spaces that are creating a modern day slavery dynamic where we're creating shirts and jeans for 15 cents on the dollar, right? And so part of this is saying, acknowledging that for every racist kind of demographic, there's a piece of architecture that has been designed and built to perpetuate and facilitate it. And these incarceral states is part of that issue. And so I have gotten a lot of pushback about, oh, we should never step away from the table. We should have a seat at the table. There is no making a just in just space. Mm-hmm. You can put curtains on it. You can color it a nice, pretty color, but it's still fundamentally a problematic space. And to hear and know about these lobbyists that create laws, right? When their prisons are going up, that trigger things from being a fine to a mandatory minimum days in jail to serve, right? It's all part of this very lucrative financial infrastructure that's here. So saying to architects, we have enough, per capita, per whatever, we have enough of those institutions. At this point, it's about investing and creating and putting our minds to developing new typologies. Right? How do we create restorative justice in the built environment? So yes, I'm saying to you, oh, I'm not, my hands are equally dirty. My hands of this profession is equally dirty in the ridiculousness that is happening in the US and globally when it comes to law enforcement and with people of color.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, another question. Like our background is that we are architectural historians, and I was surprised to see that you call yourself the historian of NOMA, happily surprised. And I think you're absolutely right that this preservation of history, the awareness of history, is so important for people to know where they're coming from, to get it right, to be seen, etc. And I was wondering if within all your activities, maybe you also include the history, which is a little bit further away, but not that much, of African architecture and African urban planning, because I think this is something that, well, of course you know about it, but that the wider audience is not so much aware of, that Africa doesn't have a rural history, but also has this huge urban history that was demolished by the colonial powers. So it seems to me to be very important as sort of the fundamentals of architectural thinking. Is that something you're interested in?
Absolutely, but I think part of it is understanding that all local communities have these nuances and these stories of erasure and of the contributions in the built environment. And so really with the say it loud and engaging per community, I'm really trying to cultivate this information, right? When Google said there's not enough content that calls us great, there's actually not enough content about us in totality. Like even if you wanted to research us, we're not there. We're not being requested for publications. We're not being documented in textbooks. And so creating this activation movement to say to the communities, please gather the history of your community and let's document it. And in some of those Say It Loud exhibitions, there has been timelines that speaks to important components, but also by breaking this exhibition from being US centered and being more global, the idea and the hope is that we're able to have more Say It Loud exhibitions in the continents of Africa and various countries that's able to pull that information forward. And by pulling it forward, putting it in a platform that is completely accessible, no financial requirements to get to it, to allow that access, and then pushing publications to leverage this resource for their material as well. So the goal is really to say, I might not be able to speak to the history of the continent of Africa, but I might be able to talk to you about the history of Harlem, right? And so if I'm part of the team that starts to gather that information and we put that out there, and another group in Rotterdam does that for their group, right? Then we start to create this collective method of keeping history. Because you're right, the word historian and the title historian is not a glamorous and glorious one, but it's such a critical one, especially when you see how people are playing games with our textbooks, with our information, with our history. And, you know, I can say, I understand and know that slavery happens. My kid will know, right? but will his kid know, right? If the textbooks are saying, oh, state rights was the cause for the Civil War, and not the fact that people were violently fighting to keep slaves. That's a whole kind of conversation. And then one last story, and I'll leave you all alone, is I did a walking tour called Black Gotham in New York, where they talked about Africans here first started free, that we were initially here as highly trained, educated landowners, flourishing, really, and people who really needed our help in terms of ships and kind of the technologies. And slavery and the transatlantic slave trade came to New York, and people who were free was now becoming enslaved, right? And people were being stolen and kind of, and so what shocked me with that whole kind of awakening of understanding and information was that my history was taught to me that I started in chains. So any progress that we've made, I've been appreciative and have been very grateful. But to start the story with, I was free first, and then greed, corruption, leadership is what brought me into chains, is a different kind of awareness. Because then when you see and witness leadership here that is creating similar moves as what happened back then, you see the equation of me returning back to slavery is not a very different or distinct or distant story or trajectory, right? And so that's why it's critical that we keep history, and not just the beautiful ones, right? Not just the ones that make us excited and proud, but the things that scare us to the core as well, so that we fundamentally avoid doing those same mistakes and moving that way in the future.
Thank you.
Right.
Wow. I'm wondering, shall we leave it at that, or shall we go on a little bit further?
Well, maybe I think we should definitely ask for your advice. And
Yeah.
should we have a Say It Loud Rotterdam, or
Yeah.
the Netherlands rather?
Yeah, we were thinking of a Say It Loud Rotterdam, of course, or to have a Say It Loud in Rotterdam. We could, I mean, you know, the Netherlands is about as big as the city of New York, so why not have one that would represent all the whole Dutch condition? And we would love to really be the conduit through which you would reach our shores, and we would love to facilitate it and work with you on finding the best people, the best places, the best because we have some experience in teaching architects in the Netherlands, and you see exactly the same kind of problems with, for example, you have it's a mirror image of what, or not a mirror, it's the same image of what you are talking about. Maybe it is not an African, there's a large Afro-Caribbean populace in the Netherlands, but we also have our Turkish migrants, our Moroccan migrants, etc. And they are somehow in the architecture schools, they are not finding architecture as the place to be, as the career path to take. And you could also say about them, well, maybe because they also have had negative experiences in their communities with what architecture has meant. So I think there's an enormous piece of fertile ground here in the Netherlands for us to work with you on. And we will, well, as soon as—
I would absolutely love to do a Say It Loud Netherlands, absolutely. And I think part of it is there might not have been intrigued to come into the profession, or they actually have done great and amazing work, but we just have not equated their contributions to the built environment yet. And so this allows us opportunity to do so, and also be able to cultivate the history and the timeline of significant importance and really showcase it. So yes, absolutely. Whenever you're ready, I'm ready to get started. And I think it's powerful and important that we just think about, it's not just we're not here, right? Is that we've been here, but you just don't know about us. And architecture specifically, there's nothing in this world that only takes one person to do. Like nothing. Everything takes a team. And also in our education, we tend to glorify a singular person as responsible for a house, a skyscraper, a park. It's a team. Yeah. Right. So it's not one person's problem, it's a team's problem. And it's not one person's contributions, it's a team's contributions. And I might not be the star architect whose name is on the drawings, but if I spent, 2 years working on the residential planning for it, then that's my contributions to the built environment. And being able to claim that as part of my my contribute and gift to society is also really important to diversify and to expand as well.
Yeah, well, fantastic. So yeah, this celebratory part of it is very important, and we'd love to bring that tone of voice also to Rotterdam. Well,
and then also that also provides opportunities for publications to tell the story and really showcase and echo that work as well, and community engagement activities that pull society into the exhibition and learn of their local heroes as well.
Yeah, I think we'll have a great time. We'll get this off the ground. Thank you very much, Pascal, for your wonderful contribution and your enthusiasm and your commitment and your engagement. I'm going to announce. Well, so this was Schools Out, the 15th Schools Out. In a month from now, 4 weeks from now, we will have the 16th Schools Out, and this one will be a little bit different, because then the person next to me will be sitting next to me. Michelle Provost will be the center of attention, because this will be the moment when Michelle gets awarded the Rotterdam Maaskant Prize for contributions to architecture. And so it's a fantastic prize, as you all know. She steps in the footsteps of, or on the shoulders, I could say, of some very interesting people. And so that Schools Out will be dedicated to Michelle receiving the prize and talking to us about how the world should look like. Thank you all, and see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you again for this amazing opportunity.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.